His microphone. All guests will take their seats. The Subcommittee on Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade will now come to order. The Chair will recognize himself 5 minutes for the purpose of an opening statement. The Consumer Product Safety Commission was established in 1972 by Congress to protect consumers against unreasonable risks of injuries associated with consumer products. This statutory mission is a serious responsibility for the Commission, and it's critically important that Congress conduct oversight to ensure that public confidence in the Commission's adherence to its responsibilities and its stewardship of the taxpayer's dollar. I would like to thank Chairman Kaye and Commissioners Adler, Berkeley, and Moravich for their testimony today. We will also hear for a second panel of witnesses about Representative Pompeo's bipartisan legislation, H.R. 999, the ROV In-Depth Examination Act, and the open ROV rulemaking that has garnered substantial bipartisan concern from members on both sides of the dais and both sides of the Capitol. Consumer safety is a top priority for this subcommittee, and at a time where difficult budget decisions are being made across the government, it is critical that all agencies are held accountable for their prioritization decisions. Particular concern about the role of sound scientific principles at the Commission, the interaction between the Commission and its regulated industries, the rulemaking agenda, and the execution of congressional mandates for third-party test burden reduction, and the Commission's continued request for new authority to impose user fees. There is a fundamental constitutional issue with moving the power of the purse from Congress to a regulatory agency with no experience in dispersing fees. A wide range of open agenda items at the Commission require significant scientific evaluation and testing, from phthalates to nanotechnology to window coverings and recreational off-highway vehicles. Consumer confidence is rooted in the belief that the Commission has the capacity to base its decision on supportable scientific findings. It is dangerous and short-sighted for a safety agency to move away from science and scientific principles, as may have happened with the Chronic Hazard Advisory Panel report regarding phthalates, where even the Office of Management of the Budget guidelines for peer review were ignored. The Commission's authorizing statute is based around the presumption that voluntary industry standards and cooperative relationships with the regulated industry are the preferred method of regulation for product safety. Safety is a strong incentive for both parties. There are a number of open rulemakings that fundamentally change the relationship between the Commission and the regulated industry. In an area where it's said that 90% of the threats to consumer safety are created by 10% of the participants, it seems counterintuitive to put additional barriers between the Commission and the regulated industry when the common ground is consumer safety. This is especially so where resources are always going to dictate the Commission will need help from industry in identifying problems. One open rulemaking fundamentally changes the fast-track voluntary recall process, an award-winning program established 20 years ago to address long recall processes, which has produced tremendous results. Under this program last year, 100% of fast-track recalls were initiated within 20 days. The positive impact for consumers is real when potentially dangerous products can be taken off the shelves in days instead of weeks or months. Finally, there has been bipartisan support to reduce third-party testing burdens for small businesses around the United States. In 2011, Congress passed H.R. 2715 with explicit instructions to the Commission to evaluate the testing burden relief in good faith. But the Commission has struggled to carry out this statutory requirement, even with additional funding. 3.5 years later, small businesses are reporting they still have not seen any real burden reductions and are facing seemingly endless comment rounds, but no real solutions. We are here to make certain that we are doing what we can to prevent tragic and unfortunate injuries from consumer products. However, additional funds for the Commission are difficult to justify when there are so many questions about the scientific methodology used by the Commission to support its regulatory agenda and how the Administrative Procedure Act solicited comments are incorporated through the rulemaking process, and how the Commission operates without bipartisan support for many initiatives. The Consumer Product Safety Commission's mission must remain a touchstone for its important work and not a launching pad for an activist state driven by headlines rather than science and economics. Such an approach compromises the trust in an agency that has successfully removed thousands of unsafe consumer products from the economy, from consumer shelves, as well as the voluntary safety standards that build safety into the products on the front end. The Chair will recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Schakowsky, for the purposes of an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing about Consumer Product Safety Commission. The Commission and its mission of protecting consumers from unsafe products is very near and dear to my heart. I began work as a consumer advocate many moons ago as a young mother working to get freshness dates on food. So when you go and look at the date on food, moi. I know how important it is that consumers have access to health and safety information about the products that they purchase and use, and that they are protected against harmful products. In 2008, the landmark Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act was signed into law by President Bush. The bill was the product of broad bipartisan negotiation, and it marked the most significant reform of the CPSC and its responsibilities in decades. I also want to thank some of the advocates are here in this room and appreciate their work. The bill passed the committee 51-0 and the House by a vote of 424-1. It was slightly amended again on a bipartisan basis in 2011. And the legislation gave the CPSC additional authority and resources so it could become the consumer watchdog that Americans deserve and frankly expect. I'm proud to have authored several provisions to the bill, including a provision requiring mandatory standards and testing for infant and toddler products, such as cribs and high chairs. I also successfully added to the reform bill a requirement for postage-paid recall registration cards to be attached to products so that customers can be quickly notified if products are dangerous. The CPSC has been incredibly successful in its efforts to improve consumer protection over the last few years. There was a 34% reduction in children's product recalls just from 2013 to 2014. The 75 children's product recalls in 2014 was the lowest number in more than a decade. Thank you very much. We have seen enhanced proactive outreach to provide consumers with information about the dangers and best practices associated with everything from window blinds to electric generators to lawnmowers. And we've seen rulemaking to reduce the likelihood of preventable tragedies. I applaud the Commission on its important work. While I'm disappointed that we moved forward with this hearing on a day that Commissioner Robinson was unable to appear, I look forward to hearing the perspectives of the other commissioners about the CPSC's work and its next steps. The second panel today will provide analysis of H.R. 999, the RIDE Act. I'm strongly opposed to this bill, which would suspend CPSC's statutory authority to complete a rulemaking affecting recreational off-highway vehicles, or ROVs, until after a study is completed at the National Academy of Sciences. Not clear to me why this study is needed. After all, the CPSC has gone through its regular rulemaking process on this issue, taking into account the input of technical experts, the private sector, and the public. I'm also not sure why the National Academy of Sciences would analyze the feasibility of, among other things, providing consumers with safety information at the point of sale. While the NAS has a highly skilled staff, market and consumer analysis is not its strong suit. It also makes no sense that NAS would be required to consider the impact of a rulemaking on ROVs used in the military. The CPSC is responsible for consumer products, not military vehicles. The proposed rule is irrelevant to military ROVs. I believe this legislation is a delay tactic, pure and simple. It would delay the implementation of the CPSC's common sense consumer-focused rule to reduce ROV rollovers, enhance safety, and increase consumer information. It's not as if this rulemaking is moving too fast. The risk of ROV death is not a new one, and the public comment period for the ROV rulemaking is currently open. There's nothing preventing the supporters of this legislation from making their concerns and their suggestions known. That's the way the process is supposed to work. What we cannot do is usher in a long delay for the sake of delay. the 335 ROV-related deaths and 506 injuries from 2003 to 2013. I think it's time to act to enhance ROV safeguards, not tie the hands of the CPSC. Again, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses. Thank them for coming today, and I yield back.
Chair, thanks to gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the vice chair of the full committee, Ms. Blackburn. 5 minutes for an opening statement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to say thank you to our witnesses. We appreciate that you are here. You know, 2008 was really the year of the recall, and since that point in time, we have been very interested in the work that you're doing and have looked at your deliverables and your outcomes. Now, one of the things that is of tremendous concern to us, and I got to tell you, I heard a lot about this during Small Business Week, which was just a couple of weeks ago, and I was out and about in my district visiting with small businesses, visiting with some retailers, and there are a lot of complaints that are coming about the way you all are going about your task and some of the unnecessary burdens that are being put on retailers and on businesses and changes in reporting requirements. And I got to tell you, I think there's a lot of unhappiness with the American public in how you are doing your job. I would say, too, there's probably some confusion as to what your mission statement is and how you are meeting that. Now, I think it's fair to say that as we look at the cost to business and the cost to consumers and a cost-benefit analysis, what we want to do is drill down with you a little bit. We share the same goal, being certain that the supply chain is safe, that products are safe when consumers get those products. There are different ways to go about this, and we want to make certain that there is an accountability issue, a transparency issue, and a fairness issue or standards that are being met. So we will have questions and we'll move forward with those. I also want to take a moment and welcome our former colleague, Commissioner Burkle. It is wonderful to see you back in these halls, and it is wonderful to see you back in a hearing room, and we appreciate the work that you are doing. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield the balance of my time to Mr. Pompeo for a statement.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chairman. Look, we have thank you all for being here today, Chairman Kay and your colleagues for coming today. We have this obligation, just as you do, to make sure that the CPSC statutes are implemented in a way that is both legal and appropriate and useful and gets the economics and the safety balance just right. I think with respect to the ROV rules that you all have put forward, there's a lot of work that can be done. I think industry is prepared to try and get to a really good outcome that is a better place than the rulemaking that is proceeding will end up. I was out last week too. I was actually on an ROV vehicle out in Kansas in the woods. Wore my helmet, did all things right, and I'm here today to tell about it, which is good. I hope we can get this right. The legislation that I've proposed isn't aimed at delay. It is aimed at getting to a good outcome. It may cause a little more time and a little more thoughtfulness and a little more work to be done, but I hope we can get that right, that we can get the best science and the best engineering associated with getting these rules in the right place and get a voluntary standard put that industry can do the right thing and get these vehicles in a safe place to the right people. And I hope and look forward to working with you to see if we can achieve that. With that, I'll yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman, and does any other member seek the balance of my time? None so doing. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Democratic side for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just submit for the record Mr. Pallone's opening statement. And also,
Without objection, so ordered. So that concludes member opening statements. The chair would like to remind members that pursuant to committee rules, opening statements will be made a part of the record. We'll now hear from our witnesses. I want to welcome all of our witnesses and thank you for taking time to testify before the subcommittee. Today's hearing will consist of 2 panels. Each panel of witnesses will have the opportunity to give an opening statement followed by a round of questions from members. Once we conclude questions with the first panel, we will take a brief recess to set up for the second panel. Our first panel today, we have the following witnesses testifying on behalf of the Consumer Product Safety Commission. Chairman Elliott F. Kay, Chairman of the Consumer Product Safety Commission, thank you for your attendance. Commissioner Robert Adler, and we welcome you, sir, to the subcommittee. Commissioner Anne Marie Burkle, thank you it's good to see you again. You give me confidence that there's an afterlife. And Commissioner Joseph P. Moravec, thank you so much for your attendance today. We're honored to have all of you today. Chairman Kay, you will begin the first panel, and you're recognized for 5 minutes for the purposes of an opening statement, please.
Good morning, Chairman and Dr. Burgess, Ranking Member Schakowsky, and the members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the invitation to come speak about the work of the United States Consumer Product Safety Commission and our proposed budget for fiscal year 2016. I am pleased to be joined by my friends and colleagues from the Commission, Commissioners Adler, Burkle, and Mohorovic, and I bring regrets from Commissioner Robinson. CPSC's vital health and safety mission touches us all in some way every day. From the parents of the baby who gently moves his or her child throughout the day from crib to baby bouncer to stroller and back again to the crib, or the self-employed millennial who on a warm spring day relies on a room fan to stay cool and an extension cord to power a computer, to the baby boomer who purchased adult bed rails to help care for an aging parent, the product and CPSC's jurisdiction are inseparable from our lives. We believe we provide an excellent return on investment for the American people. We run a lean operation, and we cover thousands of different kinds of consumer products with a budget in the millions, not the billions. We are very appreciative of the continued bipartisan support for the Commission and our work. We saw this support in the overwhelming, nearly unanimous vote to pass the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act of 2008 and the near-unanimous passage of an update to CPSIA in 2011. Your support has allowed our dedicated staff to drive standards development to make children's products safer, to increase our enforcement effectiveness, and to better educate consumers about product-related hazards. Our staff has also been hard at work trying to reduce costs associated with third-party testing while also assuring compliance with the law. Congress's inclusion of the $1 million as part of our funding for the current fiscal year has enhanced those efforts. I have emphasized prioritizing those actions most likely to provide the greatest amount of relief, especially to small businesses. We are set to consider at least 3 different regulatory changes to provide relief this fiscal year, with more in the works. While the burden reduction assure compliance work proceeds, our continuing efforts to carry out and enforce CPSIA-driven enhancements to consumer product safety are reflected in our proposed budget. Unfortunately, not all of those priorities and requirements are achievable at our current levels. For that reason, we are pleased to see the President include in his budget 2 important consumer product safety initiatives. Both initiatives, if funded, will advance consumer safety and provide real value to those in industry making or importing safe products. First, we are seeking a permanent funding mechanism to allow the agency to comply with the congressional charge in Section 222 of the CPSIA. Section 222 called on the Commission to work with Customs and Border Protection and develop a risk assessment methodology to identify the consumer products likely to violate any of the acts we enforce out of all the consumer products imported into the United States. To meet our mandate, in 2011, we created a small-scale pilot that has been a success. However, the pilot alone does not fulfill the direction of Congress, and without full implementation, we will not be able to integrate CPSC into the much larger U.S. government-wide effort to create a single window for import and export filing of all products. If CPSC can be fully integrated into the single window, we can transform Congress's vision of a national scope, risk-based, data-driven screening at the ports into a reality that will mean faster entry for importers of compliant products and safer products in the hands of American consumers. Our proposed budget also seeks to address critical, emerging health and safety questions associated with the rapidly growing use of nanomaterials in consumer products. In light of the questions raised in the scientific community about the effects inhalation of certain nanoparticles might have on human lungs, concerns that center on identified similarities to asbestos exposure, we are proposing to significantly advance the state of the science as it relates to human exposure, especially to children, from consumer products. Finally, I would like to discuss an additional priority of mine, one that is not reflected in dollars, but to me at least makes a lot of sense. How we at the CPSC do what we do is often just as important as what we do. Since day one in this position, I have worked daily to try to establish a certain culture among the 5 of us at the commission level. The commission, and more importantly the American public, are far better served by an agency where we operate at the commission level in a culture of civility, collaboration, and constructive dialogue. Thank you again for the invitation to speak to you about the CPSC and the life-saving work undertaken by our staff. I look forward to answering questions you may have.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady, Ms. Berkeley, for her statement, please.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Schakowsky, and distinguished members of this committee. Thank you for holding today's hearing with regards to the Consumer Product Safety Commission. I had the honor of serving alongside many of the subcommittee members in the 112th Congress, and I am delighted to be back here on Capitol Hill in my capacity as a commissioner at the CPSC. And I do hope that today's hearing strengthens our partnership to keep consumers safe from unreasonable risks of injury. I've been a commissioner at the agency since July of 2013, and throughout this time what has continued to impress me is the dedication of the CPSC staff. The mission of safety is taken very seriously. The regulated community has also impressed me, not only with their eagerness to understand and comply with our regulations, but also with their entrepreneurial drive to innovate and advance safety. I am thankful, too, for the tone set by our chairman and joined by my colleagues. We often differ significantly on policy issues, but those differences are discussed in a mutually respectful manner. As a commissioner, I've stressed 3 general priorities: collaboration, education, and balance. Number 1, it is crucial that CPSC builds strong relationships with all stakeholders. If the lines of communications are open, we can tap the knowledge, insight, and expertise of many outside experts. This is especially important in the case of the regulated community. If we inspire cooperation rather than hostility, we will see quicker introduction of safer designs as well as timely removal of defective products, all to the benefit of the consumer. That is why I'm deeply troubled regarding the discussion of higher civil penalties, changes to important programs known as retailer reporting, and the proposals known as voluntary recall and 6B. Without question, I believe these undermine engagement and collaborative efforts. Number 2, education. It's crucial to our mission. We need to make the regulated community aware of best practices and be honest regarding what we are intending to achieve. More importantly, we also need to engage the consumer, helping them to avoid hidden hazards and take advantage of safer products that are already available to them. A prime candidate for a comprehensive educational campaign is the issue of window coverings. Increased awareness and education will prevent many unfortunate injuries and death. And number 3, while consumer safety is our top priority, I believe that safety can be achieved in a balanced, reasonable way that does not unnecessarily burden the regulated community, deprive consumers of products they prefer, or insert government into the market where it does not belong. Our statutes express a strong preference for voluntary standards rather than mandatory standards. Where mandatory standards are unavoidable, the CPSA instructs us to find the least burdensome solution that adequately addresses the risk. Mandatory standards have unintended consequences. They tend to stagnate while the world of consumer products evolves rapidly. It makes sense, therefore, to revisit our rules periodically and make sure they are effective without stifling innovation. I am pleased that the Commission voted unanimously last week for a retrospective review of our rules, and I do hope it will become a more regular activity of the Commission. Regulation is a necessary function of the government, and the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act strengthened our authority. It is clear, however, that CPSIA went too far in some respects, forcing regulation without regard to risk, let alone cost. This subcommittee led the way in moderating some of the untoward consequences of CPSIA through its work on H.R. 2715, which passed into Public Law 11228 while I was a member of the House. Some objectives of that law remain unfulfilled. Last year, the House included $1 million in our 2015 appropriations, thanks to Representative Blackburn, to kickstart our efforts on test burden reduction. There is still much more we can do to remove unnecessary regulatory burdens in this arena, and I do look forward to working with this committee on those unresolved CPSIA issues. The common goal among all of us, Congress, CPSC, industry, and consumers, is safety. We are all people who have families for whom we want safe products. I have 6 children and 16 grandchildren. I do not want dangerous products hurting them or anyone. However, the United States government cannot and should not try to create a zero-risk society. The solutions we seek should be balanced and address actual problems. Consumers should be protected from unreasonable risks, while the regulated community is protected from an arbitrary government. Thank you for this time today, and I do look forward to taking any questions you might have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Chair thanks the gentlelady. The Chair recognizes Commissioner Adler. 5 minutes, please, for an opening statement, sir.
Good morning, Chairman Burgess, Ranking Member Schakowsky, and the distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear along with my fellow CPSC commissioners today. I'm pleased to be able to testify about an agency that I've been associated with in some fashion since its establishment 40 years ago. At the outset, I'd point out that we are far and away the smallest of the federal health and safety agencies, with a current funding level of $123 million and a staff of roughly 560 FTEs. I want to put that in perspective. For FY 2016, we've asked for an appropriation of $129 million, which is an increase of roughly $6 million. By way of comparison, our sister agency, FDA, has asked for roughly $4.9 billion in FY 2016, which is an increase of roughly $148 million. Or to put it more succinctly, FDA has asked for an increase that's larger than CPSC's entire budget. Notwithstanding our modest budget, our jurisdictional scope is extremely wide, encompassing roughly 15,000 categories of consumer products found in homes, stores, schools, and recreational settings. Given this broad jurisdiction, the agency has adopted a thoughtful, data-based approach using its highly skilled technical staff to figure out which products present the greatest risk. And we address them using our regulatory and educational tools in a way designed to minimize market disruption while always making consumer safety our top priority. We don't operate alone. We've always sought to include our various stakeholder partners in a quest to reduce or eliminate unreasonable risks. Included in this group are our friends in the business and the consumer communities, as well as the various standards development bodies that work closely with the agency. And I want to note, looking from the perspective of 40 years, just how much good work has been done. There's been an estimated 30% decline in the rate of deaths and injuries associated with consumer products over this 40 years. And let me just cite a few statistics, particularly pertaining to children. Over this period of time, we've seen an 83% drop in childhood poisoning, a 73% drop in crib deaths, an 86% reduction in baby walker injuries, and an almost complete elimination of childhood suffocation in refrigerators. I'd also like to mention the tremendous strides the agency has taken to implement the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act, which has been noted was approved by the House by a vote of 424 to 1, signed by President Bush on August 14th, 2008. And among the things we have done to implement the law, we've enforced stringent limits on lead and phthalates in children's products. We've promulgated the strongest safety standard for cribs in the world. We've made mandatory a comprehensive voluntary toy standard. We've written and continue to write a series of standards for durable infant products like play yards and strollers. And we've developed new approaches to catching dangerous imported products, which we hope to expand. Since I last appeared before this committee, the Commission has experienced a significant turnover in members. In fact, I'm the last one standing. Although I miss my former colleagues, I'm pleased to welcome as new colleagues Chairman Elliott Kay and Commissioners Robinson, Burkle, and Mohorovic. Simply put, they are a joy to work with. They've brought new perspectives and insights that have freshened and sharpened my thinking on a host of issues, and they've done so in a way that has brought a new era of civility to the agency. We certainly disagree vigorously sometimes on issues, but we listen to and we trust one another in ways I've not seen at this agency in many, many years. A final point, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to reiterate my concern about a set of issues that surrounds a critical demographic that I don't think has received enough attention over the past number of years, and that is senior citizens, a group of which I am a proud member. CPSC data show that the second most vulnerable population after kids is adults over 65. And I note this is a rapidly growing group due to the aging of baby boomers and the greater longevity of our citizens. An interesting statistic, there are more of us in the over 65 age group in this country than there are people in Canada. But what's particularly troubling to me is that seniors, while comprising only 13% of the population, account for 65% of our consumer product-related deaths. And by 2020, we will be 20% of the U.S. population. So given my concerns while I was acting chair, I worked with staff to create a senior safety initiative which is ongoing and which I hope to have the Congress included and hope to work with you. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes Commissioner Mohorovic. 5 minutes for your opening statement, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Burgess, Ranking Member Schakowsky, members of the committee. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'll keep my opening remarks very, very brief and focused on only one element of evolving CPSC policy, and that is our import surveillance. This is one area that I think we can dramatically improve both our efficiencies and as well as our effectiveness. And while we are developing our strategies to better target illegitimate inbound consumer products, I believe CPSC can and should do more to facilitate legitimate trade through public-private partnerships with those importers voluntarily willing to subject their compliance processes to greater scrutiny, not unlike similar programs with CBP, TSA, and FDA. I can envision a modernized CPSC import surveillance program where harmful and non-compliant consumer goods are intercepted and rejected while legitimate cargo is identified and carried down the stream of commerce without disruption. This concept, a trusted trader program and model, moves beyond incremental increases in targeting to a more evolved, account-based understanding of importers' demonstrated commitment to making safe products. But to earn CPSC's trust, traders would undergo intense scrutiny, including thorough reviews of their supply chain competencies. They would have to empirically demonstrate a culture of compliance reflecting the highest standards, and membership would have its privileges. To attract applicants, trusted trader status would offer fewer inspections and faster, more predictable time to market. But should a trader violate the trust we have placed in them, the government's response would be swift and sure. No discussion of CPSC import surveillance is complete without addressing the $36 million annual funding level we outlined in our most recent budget request and the user fees we hope will pay for it. I'm not entirely convinced of the legality of the user fee mechanism. Moreover, while I'm generally supportive of what we want to spend that money on, I look forward to further discussions with our staff to develop a more nuanced understanding of that expenditure. However, my potential support for that spending, whether from user fees or from appropriations, is predicated on implementation of a properly resourced, trusted trader program that's capable of attracting robust participation. If we're going to ask for more money, particularly if it comes from the very importers whose shipments we're rooting around in, we need to spend some of that money making life easier for the good actors who voluntarily subject themselves to intense scrutiny. If we can develop the confidence necessary to take those good actors' shipments out of our haystack, finding the needles will be that much easier. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair would note that it appears that the era of good feelings is now settled upon the Consumer Product Safety Commission. You all referenced how well you work together, so that is, the chair takes that as a good sign as we move forward. And again, I want to thank you all for being in our hearing, we'll now move into the question portion of the hearing. Each member will have 5 minutes for questions. And Chairman Kay, let me begin. And again, thank you for your willingness to be here, and apologize about us having to reschedule during the snow day, kind of an unexpected snowfall in March that caught a lot of us by surprise. But thank you for your flexibility in rescheduling. The budget for fiscal year 16 the commission requests new commission authority to impose undefined user fees on importers. I think I've already shared with you, I have some misgivings about that and would really welcome further discussion from the commission as to how these user fees, not just how they're collected, but how they're dispersed. Are these fees that are paid into the Treasury and then subject to appropriations by the Appropriations Committee, or are they fees that are retained within the agency for use within the agency? So I would like some clarification about that. And I'd just remind the members, we are in appropriation season. The appropriations for the Consumer Product Safety Commission, I believe, comes through the Financial Services Appropriation Bill. So we all will want to be vigilant about that and make certain that we do pay attention to the agency during the appropriations. But there is the risk assessment methodology, which is a pilot program to assess hazardous imports. In the Commission's performance budget request to Congress, the targeted percentage of entries sampled is identified through the pilot system for fiscal year 2015, but is only labeled baseline, and fiscal year 16, the target is to be decided. So are we on the brink of nationalizing a pilot program where we don't know the metrics for inspection and evaluation?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, we're definitely not on the brink of nationalizing the program, even though the government is on the brink of nationalizing the single window requiring electronic filing, which is a big reason why the CPSC is trying to do its part. We want to make sure that as close as possible by December of 2016, when the system that Customs and Border Protection runs to receive electronic filing is up and running and there is truly one single window, that we are not creating an unnecessary disruption to the market by not being a part of that. But as we envision in our appropriations request, if a permanent funding mechanism one way or another would allow the agency to collect and retain the funds solely for the purpose of funding this program. It wouldn't be used for any other reason. There's a long history of agencies with border authorities doing this. We took the time to study those other agencies and work with the Office of Management and Budget to come up with what was the preferred method to not reinvent the wheel so that CPSC could do its part with the single window.
Yeah, it's actually some of the activities of those other agencies and departments that has been the genesis for my concern about this. And again, we are coming into the appropriations time. I want us to be careful about how we approach things. But on the single window issue, and Commissioner Morovic, perhaps you can address this as well. I was on the committee in the 110th Congress. That was the committee that actually did the reauthorization of the CPSC and the toy safety bill. And I became very concerned. We did hearings. Chairman Rush was sitting in this chair at the time, but that was the year that so many things were imported into the country and then found to be problematic. So there didn't seem to be a way to stop things before they came in. And then the concern became what happens to all this stuff in warehouses. It's offloaded by longshoremen in Long Beach, California, and then where is it going to end up? Nobody seemed to talk about shipping it back to the point of origin and saying, you deal with it, other country that shouldn't have sent this stuff to us in the first place because your attention was lax. So are we any better off today than we were in 2007 and 2008 as far as containing things that come into the country that may be hazardous?
Thank you, Dr. Burgess. In short, I do think we are in a much better position today than we were before. And one of the points that I remind folks of is the fact that I'm the only non-lawyer on this commission. So I think in terms of metrics from my formal education, being the only MBA. So I think of things in terms of risk on return on investment. And so in applying that to public service, I think about safety return on investment. And I'm committed to the fact that the investment and the evolution of our import targeting activities and the sophistication of those strategies is the greatest safety return on investment that we can apply in terms of our resources and our budget. It completely bypasses the difficulties that you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, with regards to recall effectiveness, et cetera, and it'll ensure that we don't have to learn from bad experience. Of course, before us, we have the potential to scale up into a nationalized program, a very significant program. Do I believe that we have a proof of concept, and do we have reason to move forward based on the success of our pilot project, the RAM? And the answer for me is absolutely. But again, I think we do have to look at more closely the significant IT spend, so it'll be able to yield the kind of targets and the targeting effectiveness that we hope to achieve, as well as the operationalization. Prior to joining the agency, I was in the conformity assessment business as part of the testing community for 8 years. So I've had to scale up massive supply chain testing operations, and with that, you expect to see significant economies of scale. That's something that I've yet to see in terms of some of the operational scope that we've identified, but I'm sure further communication will identify that.
And I'm certain that it will, and may even in this hearing. I'll yield back my time. Recognizes the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky. 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Adler, like you, I identify as a senior citizen and wondered what you anticipate will be or what already is part of this Commission's Senior Safety Initiative.
Well, thank you very much for the question. First thing I would like to announce is that we are participating in a 2015 Healthy Aging Summit, which is sponsored by HHS, which will be held on July 27th and July 28th, and the Commission will be there in a listening mode. So the agency is committed to the Senior Safety Initiative. One of the things that I asked the staff to do was to look at mechanical hazards, because that seems to be the area where seniors suffer the most. And one of the issues that we addressed was, what can you do with respect to senior citizens when there are other citizens who are not senior citizens using the same products?
What do you mean by mechanical hazards?
Falls, sawings, cuts, lacerations, things along those lines. Mm-hmm. And so what the staff has done, I think, is a very smart thing. They first looked to see products that present unique hazards and are intended for senior citizens, such as bed rails and these panic buttons that seniors wear if they fall. The next thing they've looked at is products that present disproportionate risks to seniors, but that also present unreasonable risks to the public at large. And a product there, I would say, would be table saws. And then even with respect to products where the Commission might find that there's disproportionate injury to seniors, the staff is looking into areas where we can at least alert seniors that they are at particular risk of harm, and their caregivers as well. So I think it's a fairly comprehensive program that we're doing, and I'm delighted that the staff has taken to this with such enthusiasm.
Well, as the co-chair of the Senior Citizens Task Force, let's stay in touch on that. I'm really interested. I wanted to get to the issue of flammability standards. I know the Consumer Product Safety Commission has the authority under the Flammable Fabrics Act to issue standards. And I know there are some promulgated flammability standards, and as a concept, including some children's products, that it's possible, and it looks likely, have contributed to significant use of flame retardant chemicals that pose health risks. The Chicago Tribune, which was an early reporter about this, said the average American baby is born with the highest recorded levels of flame retardants among infants in the world. And I know recent studies have linked flame retardant chemicals to a wide variety of adverse health effects: endocrine disruption, immunotoxicity, reproductive toxicity, developmental effects, impaired thyroid, neurological function, and cancer, et cetera. So my question really is if we, one, have any studies or information demonstrating that flammability standards promulgated by CPSC reduce instances of fire-related injuries, and and if you have any plans to revisit to find out if the issue of the flame retardants themselves is a danger.
Thank you, Congresswoman. So I don't know if I can do justice to this topic in a minute 23, but I'll do my best. Certainly to Commissioner Adler's point in the beginning, thanks in large part to the fire community and the CPSC staff over time, and I believe this is attributable to some of the flammability standards, especially with clothing and children's pajamas, there has been a reduction of fire-related incidents. The issue you're getting at, though, is flame retardants and to what extent those have had any impact on it. I'm not aware that flame retardants have been proven to be effective, and I'm certainly aware of the studies that you're talking about, or at least some of the studies that go to the potential health concern. And I can say to you that it bothers me even more than as a regulator. It bothers me as a parent of 2 young children that there has to be this uncertainty about products that we interact with and the chemicals that might be in them. And a perfect example of that is a couch. Most people don't view a couch as a potential hazardous product. But if it's true that the flame retardants that the TRIB pointed out that have doused the foam in an attempt to deal with cigarette fires have ended up getting in the dust, and children, as we know, go under couches, they put their hands in their mouth. If it's true that that's had a very negative impact on the health of children, that's a significant concern of ours.
And on certain usefulness in reducing flammability.
Correct. So one of the things that I've tried to do at my level is talk to our sister agencies who have overlapping jurisdictions and similar interests in this area to try to get the government working more cohesively to address this uncertainty. I think consumers deserve to know answers to these questions as quickly as possible.
What are the other agencies?
The EPA, the FDA, ATSDR with CDC, and the National Toxicology Program is part of the National Institutes of Health and the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences.
Thank you. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Tennessee. 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Kaye, let me come to you first. Commissioner Burkle mentioned and referenced the $1 million that my amendment put into advancing the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act. And I just want to ask you what you all have done to reduce that third-party testing requirement, where you are in that process. How are you putting that $1 million to work?
So thank you for the $1 million, Congresswoman. It certainly made a big difference. As soon as the $1 million was appropriated, we moved at the commission level via an amendment to our operating plan to allocate that $1 million to 7 different projects that we had identified primarily based on stakeholder feedback, but also with discussions at the commission level to try to get to this issue. And so where we are now is there's 3 projects that staff is very close to sending up to the commission for us to vote on to try to provide some of that relief. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, my direction to staff has been to prioritize those actions that will have the widest potential benefit to small businesses.
Okay, let me ask you this. In your letter to Senator Thune, you identified 3 areas for the determinations of lead content, finding international toy standards, and then guidance allowing for third-party testing exemptions. Are those the 3 areas that you're referencing?
No, those are actually 3 separate areas that my staff and I continue to work on and have discussions with Commissioner Mohorovic. So in total, you're talking about 10 different projects.
Okay. Commissioner Mohorovic, you want to respond?
I'd love to. Thank you. It's perfectly logical to wonder why, with the full commitment of the entire commission behind reducing third-party test burden, why we've achieved very little in terms of results. And that's because we're applying to these proposals an unreasonable interpretation of our statute, this language consistent with assuring compliance. And the problem is, very quickly, it's inconsistent with established CPSC policy. If you looked at the component part testing rule, which was non-controversial.
So you're in a bureaucratic quagmire.
Absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely, Congressman.
So you can't get to the outcome, the deliverable, because you're still talking among yourselves.
Not until we change that standard.
Okay,
I wouldn't
what's the
recommend sending
timeline
this
for
anymore.
getting it finished? We want this finished. So when are you going to have it finished by?
So we'll have 3 in the next few months to vote on, and then there's more to come after that.
Give me a few months. I mean, a month, 2 months, 3 months. What do you mean by that?
I think that within June we'll have the first up, and then 2 more by September.
Okay. All right. So that's going to be your deliverable. Let me ask you something else. I mentioned being out and a lot of dissatisfaction and the way you're going about the 1110 rule. All the public comment except one was against that. But I think what I'm hearing is you move forward with a little bit more of a heavy hand than what you would represent to us. And you say you want to be engaging the industry and you want to be collaborative. But the feedback I'm getting, it is those are your words, but your actions are much more heavy-handed. That you've determined what you want as the outcome, thereby you're going to let people think they're participating, but in the end, you're the rule maker, and you're going to get your way. So do you feel like that is a collaborative atmosphere in trying to work with the industry, and how would you respond to those type of comments that are made about the way you all are approaching rulemaking?
Is that for me? I'm
Yes,
happy
sir.
to answer that.
You're the chairman.
And is that question specific to 1110 rule or more general?
It is specifically to 1110, but in general when it comes to dealing with industry.
Sure. So I'll address both. The 1110 rule is in a definite pause at this point. I was not the chairman when that came up, and I was not part of what I worked on. But as soon as I became chairman, I engaged our staff, and I worked with them to make sure that they were doing much more collaborative engagement with our stakeholders.
Are you still advancing that?
No, it is not moving right now. It is in a
Okay,
pause
you're going
mode.
to put it completely in pause.
It is in pause mode. It's
Okay.
already completely paused, and what we
Okay.
have been doing is working with our stakeholder community through an advisory panel on the issue of the single window in our imports. We're running a pilot that's going to be coming out, the FR notice, in a few months, and we're trying to get it right. And so we're having those exact collaborations that you're talking
Okay,
about.
my time is out, and I will, I've got one other question, but I will submit that question to you in writing, and I thank you all, and I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson. 5 minutes for questions, please.
I thank the chair and welcome to our witnesses. A special welcome to a former House colleague, Anne Marie Burkle. Good to see you again, Anne Marie. I want to talk about nanotechnology. As a 1985 graduate of Rice University in Houston, Texas, we're proud that two of our professors, Robert Curl and Richard Smalley, won the Nobel Prize for nanotechnology. In fact, Dr. Smalley taught me Chemistry 102, so it's very special about nanotechnology. Chairman Kaye, I wrote you a letter on February 25th about this issue. The fact that your budget requests for $5 million more for nanotechnology, the research center, is almost 85% of the proposed budget increase. That caught my eye. I appreciate response to my letter, and Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter my letter and Chairman Kaye's response in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. I have a few questions to clarify issues from your letter. You stated that the reason that CPSC needs $5 million is for a new research center is because your work has, quote, identified significant data gaps regarding exposure to nanomaterials from consumer products, end quote. Can you elaborate on what these data gaps are? More details on data gaps, sir?
Absolutely, and it's not only that we've identified, Congressman, those data gaps, it's that the larger nanotechnology initiative, the NNI, that is the collaboration that I think that everyone want to see from a federal government, where all the agencies that have a presence on nano are working together. Actually, the NNI working groups have identified this data gap, and it really goes to understanding the exposure from consumer products that have nanomaterials in them. And so there's $1 billion, more than $1 billion, that have been billions of dollars that has been spent by the federal government on advancing nanotechnology, but none of that, or very little of that money, has gone to understanding the specifics of consumer product exposure, which is a unique exposure pathway. If you have a child that's out swinging a tennis racket, and every time that child hits a ball, some nanoparticles fly off, and the child is breathing those nanoparticles in, and those nanoparticles supposedly mirror asbestos, these are the types of critical health and safety questions that we want to get at and are behind our request.
Also, in your letter, you listed 4 categories as criteria for success. The first one was to develop, and this is a quote, robust test methods to determine and characterize human exposure to nanomaterials. What defines a robust testing method?
That's what I leave to our toxicologists. Certainly, I think that's what this working group has been working on with the money that Congress has been giving us, and that we, in conjunction with the National Science Foundation, as well as a number of manufacturers and other agencies, would hope to get to those answers. I'm not a technical expert. I can't decide what reaches that threshold of robustness, but I think we've got the technical expertise at our staff level to be able to make that determination.
In your letter, you state you expect to staff this research center with 12 senior scientists, 15 technicians, 10 postdoctoral students, and 12 graduate students. These positions come from your current staff or come from outside?
I think they would come from outside. It would be part of the funding.
How much expertise does your current staff have on these nano issues? Because they've been working this since 2011, I do believe.
We have some expertise. I think it's thin, though. We have a thin bench. We have a phenomenal toxicologist who is our representative in this space with the other agencies on the NNI, but admittedly, it's not a deep bench, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're not trying to go in the more costly way and try to just hire internally and procure a bunch of expensive test materials that we might not end up needing. We're trying to do the more cost-efficient way of building off a successful model and pursue it through the NSF.
How about stakeholders in the nanospace? What kinds of interaction do you have with these stakeholders?
Through the NNI working groups, there's a good amount of interaction our staff reports back.
Anybody else, the NNI, I mean other agencies working on nano with yourselves, or just that's pretty much the primary agency?
So this
EPA, who else is working? What other agencies are?
Department of Defense, Homeland Security. There are many agencies as part of NNI.
Okay, that's my questions. Yield back by saying, "Go Rockets!"
Chair thanks the gentleman. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Guthrie from Kentucky. 5 minutes for your questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was preparing for the hearing today, and I talked about Commissioner Burkle and showed up, and it's you. I'm glad to have you back. I didn't realize that you were in this role, and really enjoyed serving with you. As Mr. Pompeo and I spent 4 years of our life in the state of New York. So it was always fun to talk about what was going on with you back there. So I do have a question. It's in table saws. Back, I guess, when we were serving together at table saw manufacturers in my district. And I understand that the CPSC has begun a special study of National Electronic Injury Surveillance System data to obtain information about the type of table saws involved in incidents, along with other information about incidents. And this study began on July 2014. And it concerns me because it seems to me, and I'm not sure, but it seems to me that no outreach as to members of the industry by the CPSC was for this study. And for years, the industry has tried to work cooperatively with the CPSC, and the industry's input could have been of value. So, Commissioner Burkle, was there any outreach to the industry representatives or manufacturers regarding this special study?
Thank you, and it is good to be back here on Capitol Hill. In fact, a specific request was made that we would reach out to industry and allow them to participate and be a part of that survey, and it did not happen. So, I think that goes to the point I made earlier about collaboration and outreach. I think it's incumbent upon the agency to make sure we have these conversations with industry beforehand, whether it's before a survey or before it's a proposed rule, that we engage with them so that we go forward and we get the right information. I will say that NICE is one of the, it's a data collection system that we use, and it avails us of a lot of very helpful information. And so to that end, that's an important project. But having stakeholder engagement before the survey goes out, I think, is critical.
Also, a lot of them are concerned about mandating certain technologies, particularly patent questions that are mandating a specific technology in a federal standard. And their patent concerns have been raised throughout the table saw petition discussions over the years. And is the Commission aware that there are 140 patents related to the proposed technology held by the petitioner to mandate this technology on all table saws?
Are you referring that question to me?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, let me say this, quite frankly and quite honestly. My colleague, Commissioner Adler, this is his pet project. And I don't mean to pass the buck, because this is not a priority of mine, nor do I think it should be a priority of the agency. But to your point about the patents and the concerns about that, I have tremendous concerns about that. But it's not a project, quite frankly, that I think should be a priority of the agency right now.
Okay, I have one more question for you before we stop. You recently stated, sorry, I can see you for Mr. Pompeo there. You recently stated that the sole basis for CHAP's recommendation to the ban of most widely used chemicals was a cumulative risk assessment, which found that the majority, I guess Citizens Health Advisory Panel is what recommendation, which found that the majority of the risk associated with these chemicals was from another chemical, DEHP. Can you explain your concerns for using cumulative risk assessment as a basis for such regulatory determination?
Thank you. The CHAP, of course, and the whole phthalate proposed rule is of great concern to me. It has been of concern to me since the CHAP issued its report, because I believe the CHAP report should have been subject to a public peer review at that point. So from that point on, to me, the system and the whole process has been flawed. The cumulative risk assessment that you're talking about is one of my concerns, in that the process that's used, that's not well accepted in the scientific community, cumulative risk assessment. So I think that goes to the process and the validity and the integrity of the CHAP report. More importantly, though, I think, and certainly another grave concern I have, is when the CHAP did their review, they used very old data that was before CPSIA and before the ban of those phthalates. So that study, to me, and the CHAP report is almost, it's irrelevant because it doesn't use timely data. So the Commission has taken on analyzing the more recent data, and I've constantly and consistently said and advocated that we put the findings and the analysis of the staff on the more current data out for public comment. It should be put out for at least 60 days, and the staff should comment on how they're going to use that analysis relative to the proposed rule, because in order to get comments from the public, we have to include that information in that opportunity for them to comment.
Okay, Chairman Kerr, are you concerned about cumulative data, and do you believe it should be out for public comment?
I agree with Commissioner Burkle that the staff's analysis should go out for public comment, and I was the one who directed staff at the beginning of the process to even undertake that analysis. And my hope is that we will reach an agreement in the coming days when the staff is ready to put that out for analysis, for it to go out. As far as the cumulative risk assessment, I have to respect the work of the CHAP, because that's the statutory regimen that was set up by Congress in Section 108 of the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act. That was the scientific direction, or the policy direction, to the CHAP members, which, by the way, were picked through the National Academy of Sciences as the leading experts around the world on this issue. And so, considering that that's what the statute told them to look at, and that's what they looked at, I respect that decision on their part.
Thank you. My time's expired.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Pompeo. 5 minutes for your questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kay, I want to talk about the ROV rulemaking. You testified before the Appropriations Committee. You described the hearing as the longest, and the hearing that was held as the longest in the CPSC's history. Went late into the night, many panels, many witnesses. I appreciate you all taking the time to do that. Now I want to make sure that we don't cut short this process, and that we get the data right, the science and the engineering and technology right. That's why I've introduced a piece of legislation. Have you had a chance to take a look at that?
I have.
999. And I didn't see your name as a co-endorser, but I'm looking forward to hearing you today say that you think it's something that would make sense to make sure that industry can work alongside you and get a chance to get a set of voluntary standards that make sense.
So thank you, Congressman. And I know that you've been particularly interested, and I appreciate that since the time you've been in office, in the work of the CPSC, and I think that's a good thing. I think it's important to have this continued dialogue. The ROV issue is one of great significance to the Commission. We are taking it very seriously. Similar to the work on directing staff to do an analysis on the phthalates issue, I directed staff to redouble their efforts to engage with the voluntary standards effort to try to reach a solution. I think that that's the preferred solution many of us would like to see, if it can adequately address the hazard and it can be substantially complied with. As far as the bill is concerned, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to tell you what you want to hear. I don't have the ability to co-endorse, even if I wanted to.
You can just say it here.
Yeah, I sounds like I could say it, but I'm based on where we are in our discussions, I think it's a well-intended, but unfortunately would have a negative impact for 3 reasons. One, I don't want to call it a delay, but it looks like a delay even if it's not intended to be, and those delays cost lives. Every year, we're looking at getting close to now 80 deaths per year many of them children, associated with ROVs. So every year that this issue is not addressed, whether it's through a robust voluntary standard or a mandatory standard, is more deaths, and I think that that's something we should all be concerned about. Second of all, there are real costs. Every time that there's a death, you're talking about, from an impact on the community and society, about $8 million, as our staff estimates it from an economic standpoint. So with 100, and if it's a 2-year study and you're talking about 150 deaths, that's upward near $1 billion in costs to society that was result from this. And probably the area from a timing perspective, and I just had a conversation with Mr. Pritchard, who you hear on the second panel before we came here, the staff and the voluntary standards body, meaning industry, are really at a position that I don't think they've been at for many, many years, where they're finally engaging in a substantive technical discussion to try to resolve these issues. If this bill were to pass, it puts out for question for 2 years one of the key areas that both industry and the staff are driving to try to solve now. I just don't think that that's going to help the timing of it.
I appreciate that. No one wants more deaths. I mean, no one's advocating for delay in order to achieve that result. I know I'm not. No one on this committee would either party. It's a bipartisan piece of legislation. I know industry wouldn't want that either. I don't think it causes it. I think it's required. I think you have to get the data. I'm not going to go through it, but I've seen testimony from staff that says that we don't have the engineering and technology, right? Bob Franklin on your staff said we'd have to look at the data, looking at exposure over time to the different ROVs. It might be possible to do something like that, but we've not done it. I am thrilled to hear that you are having these discussions with industry and that you're making progress. That is absolutely a preferred solution, I think, for the CPSC, and from my perspective as well, would be a great outcome. But I would hope that you would be prepared to at least suspend the rulemaking for a period of time, put it on hold, keep it out there as something that might happen in the event that the discussions don't move forward in the way that sounds like you have at least some optimism, as do I. I'd love to see you at least consider suspending the rulemaking or put it on hold while those discussions were happening. If they fall apart in industry and you can't get together, then so be it. You can continue to proceed. Would you at least consider that?
Well, one, I don't have the power unilaterally to suspend the rulemaking, so that would have to be a commission decision. And I would say that from my perspective, I do think, whether industry likes it or not, one of the reasons that we've reached this situation where we're at a position where everybody is trying to finally reach a solution, I think that everyone has proper incentives. And from my perspective, the fact that the CPSC has taken it seriously to this point and is prepared to move toward a mandatory standard has provided the types of conditions that have created this environment. And so I think that it's incumbent upon us to keep moving forward. As I mentioned, the deaths, they do certainly weigh on me. And so that's not something at this point that I think would be a positive.
Well, I hope you'll reconsider that. I may or may not be the incentive structure that's been achieved, but we have a June 19th deadline now for comments to come in. Those comments, I know, will be critical of the rule from many in the industry. I hope that doesn't put, I want to keep it in a constructive way, and I hope that this deadline won't artificially create animosity, where I think there's a chance to really get it right, save lives, and get the rule right. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair, thanks. Chair, thanks, the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Indiana. 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Indiana has a large presence of juvenile product manufacturers in the state that make everything from strollers to car seats, and I've heard firsthand about the challenges that they face with regards to redundant testing requirements that might do nothing to advance safety while siphoning away money that could have been spent on R&D in these companies' innovation and resources like additional employment. And one Hoosier manufacturer told me recently that Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act was passed. Since it's passed, they've spent $12.5 million in testing costs alone. And that's because they not only have to test every platform that the products are on, but every SKU as well. So not only do they spend an average of $8,900 to test every new stroller or cradle design, but they have to spend an extra $1,000 to test every paint, every new paint color as well. And so I think we all agree that the safety of our children is of utmost importance and shouldn't be compromised. However, I think we have to draw the right balance and to ensure that the companies have the needed resources to do further R&D to ensure their products are safer. And so, Mr. Chairman, I have a question to you. that with this in mind, what actions have you taken in the past year to provide relief to companies with respect to these costs of these third-party testing requirements?
Thank you, Congresswoman. One of the areas that we found really interesting, and this has been discovered by our Small Business Ombudsman, and I don't want to get Commissioner Mohorovic upset since it involves his prior occupation, but we have found that a lot of the third-party labs are testing for services that are not required. And so our Small Business Ombudsman and his office provide phenomenal support and assistance working with small businesses, and I would encourage any of the members who have small businesses in particular that have issues to reach out to Neil Cohen of the CPSC, because he can work with companies to go through their testing reports and to find out whether or not they really need certain testing. Now, he doesn't actually go line by line, but what he says is, here are some general guidances, and here are some questions that you should be asked. He really does a phenomenal job of empowering a lot of companies, and I think that's gone a huge way to addressing some of these issues.
Thank you. Commissioner Moravec?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think what you'll get is a lot of the dodging tactics from the agency to try to explain why we haven't achieved much in terms of measurable outcomes and reducing the cost and burden of third-party testing. We have all of the resources we need. We have the legal authority. We just lack the will to be able to enact very many of the policies and suggestions that have come before the agency. So we can blame the testing labs. We can blame retailers for retail protocols. We can dodge and weave on this as long as we want. But as I said earlier, it's frustrating for me particularly because it lacks alignment. It's so inconsistent with established CPSC policy. If we applied the same appreciation for risk tolerance that we did in the promulgation of the component part testing rule, we would have all of the emphasis, and staff would be able to recommend countless means to reduce the cost and burden without any adverse health or safety impact.
Thank you. Chairman Kaye, it's my understanding that $1 million of your 2015 budget was to be allocated to reducing the needless and duplicative testing burdens. Can you explain what actions you've actually taken in leading the Commission to fulfill that role? How have you reached out? What do companies expect to see from this relief if we have, mandated that in your budget?
Sure, and one of the limitations, and I agree with Commissioner Mohorovic that we do have a lot of what we need, but we don't have everything that we need. But one of the areas is that it's a one-time appropriation, which means we cannot staff up from it. We can't count on, it's not prudent to hire a bunch of people without knowing how you're going to pay for them in following fiscal years. So most of this money has gone through contracting. So we contract out with organizations who can do a lot of the technical work to figure out if there is possibility for relief. But ultimately, our staff has to take that work. There has to be resources internally to be able to turn that work around and to try to make it something actionable. And so the three areas that I mentioned in response to Congresswoman Blackburn's questions have to do with providing this exact type of relief, looking, for instance, at natural wood and whether or not if you use a natural wood alone, you have to test for certain heavy metals that are required by law. We keep trying to check off lists of materials and types of products that you don't actually have to test to avoid these costs. And that has been the theme, both in terms of stakeholder engagement and internal deliberations that we're trying to pursue to make it worth the while.
Thank you. My time is up. I yield back.
Chair, thanks, the gentlelady. The chair recognizes the ranking member of the full committee. Mr. Pallone, 5 minutes for your questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is of Chairman Kaye. There have been concerning reports of young athletes that have non-Hodgkin lymphoma and other blood cancers, and who also have been playing sports on athletic fields that are filled with crumb rubber coming from tires, which often contains cancer-causing chemicals. This past October, I wrote to the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry explaining that I believe additional research is needed into whether synthetic turf athletic fields increase the risk of lymphoma, leukemia, and other blood cancers. In the agency's reply, they stated that they're supporting efforts by the Commission in this area. Yet in 2008, the Commission released a statement saying that fields filled with crumb rubber are, quote, okay to install, okay to play on, unquote. And I was pleased to hear more recently that a spokesperson explained that the 2008 statement does not reflect your current views. So I just wanted to ask, is it correct that your views are not reflected in that 2008 report? And do you agree that additional research and study is necessary to determine whether crumb rubber used in synthetic turf athletic fields presents any public health dangers? And also, is the Commission committed to working with other federal agencies to obtain this information and to ensure young athletes playing on these fields are protected? Just ask you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for your leadership on this area. I think you had 3 questions embedded in there, so I'm going to try to address all 3 in turn. The first is, you are absolutely correct that 2008 release does not reflect my views of the state of play, and I think it's important to note that 2008 release didn't even reflect, as far as I understand it, the technical staff's views at the time, that there was a political effort at the time at the Commission to say something in the headline of the release that may not actually reflect the state of play, which is basically that those products are safe. I think there's a big difference in looking at the lead exposure that might exist from the blades of the grass and determining that based on a small sample size, the staff was not able to say that there were disconcerting levels of lead in those fields in that particular aspect. That's very different from saying these things are safe to play on. Safe to play on means something to parents that I don't think we intended to convey, and I don't think we should have conveyed. So that's the answer to the first question. The answer to the second question is, absolutely, we are working with our federal partners to try to figure out a better and faster way, working together to see if an issue such as crumb rubber can be resolved more quickly. As I mentioned to the ranking member earlier, we're working with EPA, we're working with NIH through their center down in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences and the National Toxicology Program, CDC, ATSDR, and then also the FDA. We're trying to figure out a way for the government to come together, use our existing resources and authorities to address these issues. Parents don't care which acronym named government agency is supposed to do what. They just want answers, and they want this uncertainty resolved. And the third question, I apologize, I can't even remember what the third one was. If you wouldn't mind asking me again.
Well, I think it's really basically trying to find out what your view is and what the Commission is doing and whether you're working with other federal agencies on the issue.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back the chair. Thanks, the gentleman from Illinois. Mr. Kinzinger, recognized 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today, and it's nice to have you in front of the committee. Mr. Chairman, Chairman Kaye, it seems that banning a chemical that's been deemed safe by other government agencies opens the door to the use of substitutes that have been far less studied, and with far fewer scientific and performance data available. Is the agency prepared to deal with the market and potential safety repercussions of transitioning from well-tested phthalates to the uncertainty associated with any potential substitutes?
Well, this gets into, Congressman, some of the answers to Congressman Pallone. There's a larger issue going on from a public policy matter where, unfortunately, and the concept that you're getting to is regrettable substitution, where one chemical is banned and we don't really have a full sense from a scientific and safety perspective what the substituting chemical will be. I think that's a failed public policy, I have to admit. I think the better approach, and this can be done working with industry, and this would be something that I would like to see happen, is for the government and industry to come together to not only focus on which chemicals shouldn't be used, but to try to get to a faster way to figure out which chemicals should be used. So as a public policy matter, that is my preference. Unfortunately, neither the resources or the authorities and the directions that agencies have been going in for a long time are moving in that direction. But again, as part of these collaborative efforts that I'm trying to undertake and that we're trying to undertake from CPSC with these other agencies, that's one of the key goals that we're looking at.
Yeah, and I think, until we get to that point where we can have that perfect system, I think we ought to be very careful when we look at banning substances, because if we don't have a situation in place where we can do all the studying of alternatives, I think, we ought to be very, very careful. Let me, following the phthalate rulemaking, Commissioner Burkle noted in her concern on banning chemicals that have been in use for many years and whose risk have been studied when little is known about the substitutes. So you said you agree with that. I want to see, Commissioner Burkle, what's your thoughts on the idea of banning something with unknown substitutes to follow?
Thank you for your question. As you note, that was one of my concerns when the NPR came out, that we are now proposing substitutes to be used that we know little less about than we know about the chemicals that are already banned. My more general concern with regards to the CHAP, and I've both in comment and here today and also in statements, previous statements, was the whole process for how the CHAP report was done and now this proposed rule. And I think we really need to take a step back, whether it is regarding chemicals or whether it is regarding any of the things we do. We are a data-driven agency. And so to make sure that we have the data correct and to make sure that the processes we follow are correct and that the CHAP followed a process that the entire scientific community can accept as credible is very key to our agency and the credibility of our agency. It's been noted the American people rely on information coming from us, so it's important that we get it right. And so if it takes a little more time, if it requires a request to Congress that we can't promulgate that rule within 180 days after the CHAP report was issued, so be it. We have to make that request because it's incumbent upon our agency to get it right, to take the time that we need to do.
Yeah, and I want to add to that, especially, I guess maybe to reiterate what you said. I understand that there's, in many cases, a need for 180 days. Going past deadlines isn't fun. It's nothing any of us like to do. But I think at the risk of maybe getting something wrong versus getting something right, even if we have to go past a little bit of a deadline, I think, frankly, Republicans and Democrats, Americans, independents, far right, far left would all agree that that's probably a preferable way to go. And so that's, some of the concerns we have there. Chairman Kaye, I want to go to a bit of a different subject just real quick. In the preamble for the proposed rule on voluntary recalls, the CPSC indicated that it has encountered firms that have deliberately and unnecessarily delayed the timely implementation of the provisions of their correction action plans. How many firms have deliberately and unnecessarily delayed the implementation of provisions of their corrective action plans?
Congressman, I'll have to follow up and give you an answer to that. I don't know the answer to that question. The voluntary recall rule, as my colleagues know very well at this point from our continued reiterations of our positions on it, is not something that's been a high priority for me. I've had higher priorities that go to saving lives. I'm not saying the rule is without merit. I think it has some value, but it has not been something that I've spent a lot of time on. I thought that early.
Can you give me like an example maybe of?
I can certainly give you anecdotal examples of where we have reached a situation where the agreements are voluntary. So we reached a voluntary corrective action plan with a company, and we noticed when they file their quarterly reports that they're not doing what they said they were going to do. They're either not engaging on social media or they're not attempting to reach out and put forth the amount of resources and effort that they said they would. I wouldn't name a company even if I could, but I can't name a company at this point. But I thought Commissioner Adler last week during a public meeting that we had when this topic came up had a phenomenal suggestion where he asked our staff to spend a few months collecting this data and reporting back to the Commission to see whether or not this is a real issue. And to Commissioner Burkle's point, we are data-driven, and I think that that'll be a useful exercise, and we'll all be curious to see that.
Good. Well, yeah, I'd be interested, too, and I just want to point out, let's make sure, if you're going to throw out the entire system, that it is very data-driven. So with that, thank you all for being here, and I'll yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma. Mr. Mullen, 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the commissioners for taking the time to be here. I know you guys have a very busy schedule, too, and anytime you got to come to the Hill, you got to be thrilled about that, right? But, we are all held accountable for statements that are made, and sometimes when you're sitting in a position, Chairman, that you set in, your agency carries a pretty big stick, and your statements can be devastating to people that are producing a product that depend on retail sales. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, and I think about that all the time. There's a lot of thought that goes into what I say, whether I end up saying something like that or not.
Well, I'm holding in my hand right here a story that was published by Indianapolis news agency, and it says, if a consumer was to see a gas can at a retail that contained a flame arrestor, we would encourage them to select such a model as it provides a vital layer of fire protection. That was made by your agency. Are you familiar with that news story?
I am.
Do you agree with that statement?
I don't understand enough about the technical aspects of flame arrestors. I'm sorry, that's just not on gas cans. I can't comment one way or another.
Well, but your statements have an impact, and the flame arrestors that we're talking about, they're only sold on commercial cans, not in retail stores. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not familiar with that. I don't have any familiarity with gas cans other than talking to our staff and knowing that the issue that you're talking about.
But someone on your staff made this statement. And the reason why I say this is because in my district, I had a manufacturer that produced retail gas cans. And your agency came out and made a statement referring to retail gas cans, and has nothing to do with retail gas cans. They're only regulated by OSHA and the EPA with the flame arresters. Once again, we're held accountable for what we said, and your agency made a statement that could have possibly cost real people their jobs. So does the CPSC regulate commercial safety cans?
We do not, but the statement that you're talking about, I'm not sure that it's inconsistent with the position that our staff has taken in the voluntary standards capacity.
Well, okay. Well, then let's talk about that. Are you aware that a commercial safety can with the flame arrestor failed an ASTM protocol?
I am not.
But you made the statement. Your agency made the statement encouraging people to go out and buy a gas can from a retail store that doesn't even exist, and the purpose of it is to keep children from being burned. But you guys made a statement that failed that exact test, but yet the consumer can does. It met those ASTM standards. You don't see a problem with this?
I see a problem with it if what you're saying is 100% accurate, and I'm not
Well,
doubting
I'm holding
you.
a news story.
No, I understand.
You guys sent the press release.
I'm not doubting.
And this is coming from ASTM, their testing protocol that said it failed.
I understand that, but my point is that I'm not familiar enough with the area that you're talking about where I can give you the type of answer you're looking for.
Then how about we do this? Why don't you get back with my office?
Absolutely.
Since you guys are making those statements, and since they affect real jobs in my district, why don't you get back with me and give me that information so you can be spun up to it, so the next time that your agency opens its mouth and gives a statement like that, maybe they're informed about what they're saying.
Would you be willing to have a meeting with my staff and me?
Without question. We would love to, because we
Okay.
would like to get to the problem of this too, because statements like that hurt real people.
Excellent. So my hope is that you would be willing to come out to our testing center where we have the technical expertise and we can walk through the gas cans and we can look at the issue together. Would you be willing to do that?
Absolutely, I would.
That'd be great.
But then we got to come back, and if I'm going to be willing to do that,
Yep.
if what I'm saying is accurate, I'd like you guys to make another statement
You got it.
publicly
You got it.
backing that up.
Yeah, let's get to the answers together, and then we'll figure out where we go from there. And you have my commitment that if it turns out that we said something that we both
Well, it's
believe
not
is
the statement says it, and you guys.
No, well, but
we
the rest
checked
of it,
with you.
if we said something that is not accurate, you have my commitment that I will say something that is accurate. I'm not going to leave it to anybody else. I will say it.
Good enough. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chair, thanks, the gentleman. And the gentleman brings up an excellent point. Several years ago, I actually took a field trip out to the CPSC testing facility, and it was a very illuminating day. My understanding is you're in new headquarters now, and I think the gentleman's quite right. A field trip of the subcommittee out to the CPSC would be both informative and instructive, and probably help the commission as well as the subcommittee members. And we will see about putting that in the process. I just also observe that I am, in addition to being chairman of this subcommittee, I am the chairman of the House Motorcycle Caucus. I know that's kind of a disconnect, but I am. And going over to talk to that group one day after we passed the CPSIA here in the subcommittee in 2007 or 2008, there was a young man, very young man, probably 12 or 13 years old, who stood up in front of the group and said, "Mr. Congressman, if you promise to give me my motorcycle back, I promise I won't eat the battery anymore." Apparently youth motorcycles the sale had been prohibited during the bill that we passed, and until those technical corrections were enacted, it made it very, very difficult for the people who sold youth motorcycles and their parts. So we do have to be careful about the unintended consequences. Seeing no other members, did you have a follow-up question, Mr. Sikowski? Seeing no further members wishing to ask questions for this panel, I do want to thank you all for being here today. This will conclude our first panel, and we will take an underscored brief recess to set up for the second panel. And thank you all very much for your time today.
I am, it's true, but you see, next time I'll bring my wife. Good to see you, sir. Yeah, very good to see you.
How you doing?
All right.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Don't get sunburned.
Yeah, right? You too. Have a good time. Thank you so much.
That go all right?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, stay out there. We're going to truck out there.
Just sit there, get their ideas. I'll make sure they're here now if they're not. Unfortunately, he had to. But,
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Let me encourage everyone to take their seats, and we'll ask the panel to be seated.
Oh, okay. I thought it was just included.
Welcome back. The subcommittee will come back to order, and I want to thank everyone for their patience and taking time to be here today. We're ready to move into our second panel for today's hearing, and we'll follow the same format as during the first panel. Each witness will be given 5 minutes for an opening statement, followed by a round of questions from members. For our second panel, we have the following witnesses: Mr. Ronald Warfield. I have here Buck, is that correct? CEO of ATV, ROV, UTV Safety Consulting. Ms. Heidi Crow-Michael from Winsboro, Texas. Thank you for being here today. Ms. Cheryl Falvey, beg your pardon, co-chair of the Advertising and Product Risk Management Group at Crowell Mooring, and Mr. Eric Pritchard, Executive Vice President and General Counsel for the Recreational Off-Highway Vehicle Association. We'll begin our second panel with Mr. Warfield. You're recognized for 5 minutes for the purpose of an opening statement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking members, and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to testify in support of H.R. 999, the ROV In-Depth Examination or the RIDE Act. My name is Buck Warfield, and I have extensive experience in dealing with safe and appropriate use of off-highway vehicles. First, a bit of background. I was employed by the Maryland State Police as a police officer or a trooper for over 23 years, and I retired in 1993. With regard to off-highway vehicle experience, in 1985, I was trained and certified by the Specialty Vehicle Institute of America, SVIA, as an ATV instructor. In 1989, I became an ATV Safety Institute, or ASI, licensed chief instructor, and I continue to be contracted by ASI to train, license, and monitor other ATV instructor staff. With respect to recreational off-highway vehicles known as ROVs or side-by-sides, I have assisted several agencies, including military and government groups, in developing primary ROV training programs and combining the Recreational Off-Highway Vehicle Association, or ROVA, approved training program in December of 2010. I currently serve as Chief ROV Driver Coach Trainer, and I have a training facility at my farm in Sykesville, Maryland, which has been designated by ROVA as a driver coach training center, and that is one of only 3 in the entire United States. On a personal note, I have logged over 900 hours as an operator of my personal ROVs since 2006. I currently own 2 ROVs utilized primarily for ROV training, and 2 more utilized for daily facility maintenance at my training center and farm. I participated in the development of the ROV Basic Driver Course Curriculum, which is designated for current and prospective recreational off-highway vehicle drivers. The basic driver course is a training opportunity that provides current and experienced ROV drivers the chance to learn and practice basic skills and techniques. It addresses basic operation and emphasizes safety awareness related specifically to ROV operation. The overall aim of the driver coach course is to provide for drivers development in the area of skill and risk management strategies. This includes learning to foster driver gains in basic knowledge, skill, attitude, values, and habits. I'm here to support H.R. 999. The legislation would only pause the Consumer Product Safety Commission's ongoing ROV rulemaking until the National Academy of Science, in cooperation with the Department of Defense and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, perform a study of the vehicle handling and requirements proposed by CPSC. I do not claim to be an engineer or to fully understand the complex engineering issues, but I do understand that these are some basic disagreements on a select few issues between engineers at CPSC and the engineers who work for major manufacturers. I appreciate that CPSC is well intended. I also know that the manufacturers develop safe, capable vehicles for me, my family, my friends, and the students I train to use. My decades of experience with powersport vehicles, including training countless people who have had no prior experience with ATVs or ROVs, show me that these vehicles are safe with amazing capabilities when operated as intended. H.R. 999 is narrowly tailored to examine, first of all, the technical validity of CPSC's proposed lateral stability and vehicle handling requirements. Also, the number of ROV rollovers that would be prevented if the rule were adopted, and whether there is a technical basis for the proposal to provide information on a point-of-sale hang tag about a vehicle's rollover resistance on a progressive scale, and lastly, the effects on the utility of ROVs used by the U.S. military if the rule were adopted. So, in conclusion, I think the best way forward would be for the industry and CPSC to work together to find a voluntary solution that works for all the parties and protects the safety of ROV drivers and passengers. Barring a cooperative solution, the best and safest way forward is for independent third-party experts to make sure that we get it right. Thank you, sir.
The gentleman yields back to Chair. Thanks, the gentleman. Ms. Gromichael, you're recognized 5 minutes for the purpose of an opening statement, please.
Thank you. My name is Heidi Cromichael, and I would like to thank you all for allowing me to speak today on behalf of my son, J.T. Crow. I play many roles in life. I am a homemaker and an advocate, but most importantly, a mother to 5 children. J.T. Crow is my second child and firstborn son. He was a happy and extraordinary 9-year-old boy. At school, he was a straight-A student with perfect attendance. He loved science and learning about birds and butterflies. JT also loved being outside and playing sports like soccer and football. JT's life was cut short when he went for a ride in a 2007 Yamaha Rhino 450. While riding at a slow speed around a slight curve, the ROV suddenly and inexplicably rolled over. Though JT was wearing a safety belt, he was thrown from the Rhino ROV and then crushed by the half-ton vehicle as it rolled over. Paramedics rushed JT to the emergency room, but he had sustained more injuries than his young body could handle. My son died that day when he was 9 years old, and my life was forever changed. On a daily basis, I live with the pain of the tragedy that struck my family and the fear of knowing that it could happen to other families. This fear has led me to become an advocate for ROV safety and industry reform. I've been given the opportunity to use my son's life to make a difference that can save lives. As we sit here this morning, the ROV industry is one that sets its own safety standards and makes its own rules, and innocent people are paying the price. I'm not against ROVs. I just want safe ROVs. Many consumers buy ROVs because they have 4 wheels and sometimes seat belts, roll bars and roofs, and they look safer than ATVs, but ROVs are not safe. And it has been many years, and every year, every day, that there is not a better solution implemented for ROV safety is a day that more people, more children, our children, are put at risk. When we wrote the Citizens Report on Utility Terrain Vehicle Hazards and Urgent Need to Improve Safety and Performance Standards in February of 2009, asking for safety and performance standards, including minimum occupant containment, stability, and seatbelt standards, we were hopeful our recommendations for safer ROVs would become standard. We asked for action. Nothing happened. An already unacceptably high casualty rate will continue unless action is taken. In 2014, ROV use resulted in at least 61 deaths and 8 more in 2015. While less stringent than the recommended safety measures in the Citizens Report, the CPSC has proposed standards that would significantly improve ROV safety. If the ROV industry really wants to protect their consumers, why wouldn't they want to make the safest product possible? Why wouldn't they want to do all they could do to protect the people who purchase their vehicles? I have been given the opportunity to speak to many families, and we all share a common bond. We have lost someone we love in an ROV rollover accident. Perhaps the most painful part of my role as an advocate for this cause is hearing the heart-wrenching stories from those families. I know I'm not alone in asking this committee to allow the CPSC to move forward with its rulemaking to issue ROV safety standards and stop the senseless death of our loved ones. In my journey over the last 8 years, I have collected the names and stories of those who shared a fate similar to JT's, and it is for them that I speak today. For Ellie Sand, age 10. Kristen Lake, 11. Dusty Lockaby, 14. Ashlyn Vargas, 12. Danny Bernard, 18. Stephanie Caton, 26. Whitney Bland, 13. Sydney Anderson, 10. And Abby West, age 13. Our stories did not begin and end on the day our loved ones were killed or injured. The battle is ongoing for all of us. We will miss soccer games, dance recitals, graduations, birthdays, weddings, and holiday celebrations. We will live with the consequences forever. Today you have the opportunity, and I think the obligation, to help me honor these young lives, their families, and the life of my son, JT Crow. But it is more than that. You have an opportunity to become a part of their story, the part that offers hope for the future by bringing about change. Our request is simply common sense. It is unimaginable that anyone would feel differently. If you don't do something about it, can you live with yourself? Delay is a problem. Delay puts our children at risk. It has been too many years and too many tragedies already. We urge you not to contribute to any further delay. Thank you for your time.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back. Ms. Falvey, you're recognized 5 minutes for opening statement, please.
Thank you. Chairman Burgess. Chairman Burgess, Ranking Member Schakowsky, distinguished members, thank you for providing the opportunity to discuss the statutory framework that the Consumer Product Safety Commission will use to address the kind of risks we've just heard about. I served as the General Counsel of the Consumer Product Safety Commission from 2008 to 2012 during the implementation of both the Virginia Graham Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act as well as the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act. Both of those statutes made voluntary standards mandatory. I've been asked to discuss the way the CPSC statutes interrelate to the voluntary standards process to inform the committee's consideration of H.R. 999. My oral remarks will focus on 3 important aspects of the interrelationship between the voluntary standards process and mandatory law. First, safety standards developed by the CPSC require time and effort to develop in order to meet the statutory requirements. It's not easy. Section 7 of the CPSA provides the CPSC with the authority to promulgate rules that set forth performance standards and require warnings and instructions, but only when the CPSC finds such a standard reasonably necessary to prevent or reduce an unreasonable risk of injury, and that the benefits of such regulation bear a reasonable relationship to the costs of the regulation. The Commission must consider and make appropriate findings on a variety of issues, including the degree and nature of the risk, along with the utility of the product and the costs and a means to achieve the objective. To issue a final rule, the Commission must find that the rule is necessary to reasonably eliminate or reduce the unreasonable risk of injury, and that issuing that rule is in the public interest. Must also find that the rule imposes the least burdensome requirement that would adequately reduce the risk of injury. Congress recognized just how difficult it is for CPSC to do that when it enacted the CPSIA and made it easier to make voluntary standards mandatory law in the Danny Kaiser Child Safety Notification Act, due in part to resolute efforts by Ranking Member Schakowsky, which streamlined the process of making voluntary standards mandatory law. Second, the CPSC statute favors voluntary standards when they eliminate the risk of injury and are complied with by manufacturers. If a voluntary standard addressing the same risk of injury is adopted and implemented, the Commission cannot proceed with a final rule unless it finds that the voluntary standard is not likely to eliminate the risk of injury or that it's unlikely that there will be substantial compliance with the voluntary standard. These can be very difficult findings for the Commission to make. As a data-driven agency, the CPSC staff has to look for hard science to demonstrate the intended safety benefits of both its standards and consensus-driven voluntary standards. But the CPSC must still attempt to extrapolate from current data the likely future effects of its proposed rulemaking. The legislative history of the CPSA sets a high bar, directing the CPSC to consider whether the voluntary standard will reduce to a sufficient extent such that there will no longer exist an unreasonable risk of injury. Predicting that there is an unreasonable risk in certain circumstances is easy. It can be extremely difficult when you're dealing with the highly technical issues of vehicle rollover. And that is why it takes staff time to develop the rulemaking packages and why it's over 500 pages long. Determining whether there's substantial compliance is also a challenge when so many products come into the country now from overseas. The legislative history of the CPSA directs that the Commission look at the number of complying products rather than the number of complying manufacturers. And those products are coming in from all over the world. Third and finally, the challenges of making voluntary standards mandatory law is one of the most important lessons we learned in both CPSIA and the Virginia Graham-Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act. These voluntary standards are iterative, they evolve over years, and unless we know that the test methods can be replicated and are reliable, making them law prematurely can be very dangerous.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. Chair recognizes Mr. Pritchard. 5 minutes for an opening statement, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to testify in support of H.R. 999, the ROV In-Depth Examination, or RIDE Act. My name is Eric Pritchard. I'm the Executive Vice President and General Counsel of the Recreational Off-Highway Vehicle Association, known as ROVA. ROVA is a not-for-profit trade association sponsored by Arctic Cat, BRP, Honda, John Deere, Kawasaki, Polaris, Textron, and Yamaha. ROVA was formed to promote the safe and responsible use of recreational off-highway vehicles, called ROVs or side-by-sides, in North America. Between 2011 and 2014 alone, ROV sales are conservatively estimated to total more than 750,000 in the U.S. These popular off-highway vehicles are used safely by families, emergency personnel, and the U.S. military in a variety of environments, ranging from mud to sand to forested trails. This is a high-growth industry and a bright spot in the U.S. manufacturing economy. ROVA is accredited by the American National Standards Institute to develop standards for ROVs and has worked with numerous stakeholders for years to develop those standards, commencing in 2008 and culminating in voluntary standards approved in 2010, 2011, and most recently in September 2014. The CPSC has been involved throughout that process. The newest ROV voluntary standard includes a new dynamic stability and handling test and requirement, as well as new alternative seatbelt reminders that were proposed by the CPSC staff, and driver's side speed limiting seatbelt interlocks found in over 60% of the 2015 model year ROVs. Nonetheless, and essentially simultaneously with the approval of the new voluntary standard, the CPSC voted out the pending notice of proposed rulemaking regarding ROVs. The NPR largely ignores the new voluntary standard. Instead, the CPSC staff analyzed the prior 2011 version of the voluntary standard and based it on testing of vehicles from model year 2010. In a supplemental briefing submitted 3 weeks after the voluntary standard was approved, the CPSC staff summarily rejected the new standard because it did not match the rulemaking. The CPSC's proposals are not supported by science or real-world application. One area of concern is the CPSC's application of on-road vehicle dynamics to vehicles used in rugged off-highway environments. Meanwhile, the CPSC actually continues to conduct testing in support of the NPR it's already voted out. While our review of the CPSC's data underlying the rulemaking is not yet complete, I can share a couple initial observations with you. According to the CPSC's data, where seatbelt use is known, approximately 90% of riders suffering fatalities did not wear the seatbelts that are provided in every ROV. Next, approximately 60% of the severe injury rolled sideways incidents in the data were reported by a plaintiff's law firm. This is a representative example of the reporting relied on by the CPSC. A 46-year-old man was injured by the tip-over of an ROV whose unpadded roll cage crushed his foot on June 16, 2006. While it has been a year since his accident, foot is still swollen, he finds it extremely difficult to walk and is in considerable pain. End. Putting aside the bias of a plaintiff's lawyer's reporting, this is not a scientifically sound approach to gathering data. It tells us nothing about how or why the alleged tip-over occurred, and it's not possible to draw any statistical conclusions based on this limited information. These vehicles are significantly more complex than other products under the CPSC's jurisdiction. The ROV manufacturers' engineers have serious safety concerns about the effects of the CPSC's proposals. The RIDE Act will help resolve these matters by having these proposals examined by an independent agency such as the National Academy of Sciences. This common sense approach, resolving technical issues before considering implementation, should be supported by everyone. Some, however, have attempted to characterize the RIDE Act as further delay in a long process. The record, however, does not support that criticism. The voluntary standard has been updated as technology has evolved. The fact that the CPSC spent years drafting a proposed rule based on vehicles from 2010 cannot be evidence that the rule should be pursued, nor is the quantity of pages in the briefing package relevant to their quality. And the NPR comment period has been extended only because the CPSC failed until recently to turn over the documents and data underlying the rulemaking. This morning, an ROV industry group is meeting with CPSC staff to discuss voluntary standards. ROVA members met with the CPSC on May 5. The effort to establish a mutually agreeable voluntary standard is the best approach, a view that I understand is shared by the CPSC in light of this morning. But in the meantime, the NPR remains pending. It would be a mistake to proceed to a mandatory rule without first conducting the testing contemplated by the RIDE Act. It's imperative that we get this right for the families, emergency personnel, and the military who use these vehicles in a variety of off-highway terrains and conditions. Thank you for your time.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. The chair is prepared to recognize Ms. Schakowsky. 5 minutes for your questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have to begin by saying, as a consumer advocate, pretty much all of my adult life, I've been around these conversations for a very long time. And frankly, I think this panel is reflective of what happens to consumers 3-1 on not doing these kinds of mandatory standards. You know, one example, I've been working on this rear visibility and the number of children who are killed when often their parent or grandparent drives their car over backwards on them. We had one in Chicago recently. And now we're going to have, by 2018, mandatory in every car, there's going to be a camera. That bill was passed in 2008. and an average of 2 children die every week. Well, heck, that's not that many kids. 355 deaths from these vehicles since between 2003 and 2013. And thank you, Ms. Crow-Michael, for reading some of those names and bringing it home to us. And thank you for your courageous testimony today. I would like to hear from the industry instead of why it all ought to be voluntary, because you said 15, I guess that's under the voluntary standards, 15 people have died this year. Is that right already? Isn't it you say 2015?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So that's under voluntary standards, I take it. Well, maybe cost benefit doesn't make that worthwhile to have mandatory standards. I disagree. And I think that while you want to get it right, absolutely, I'm sick of hearing the fault is the trial lawyers. The fault is the user who doesn't put on the seat belt. And if we can do something to save another life, and I'm with you, then we need to have mandatory standards. So I'm wondering if you had any feeling that you had any reason not to trust the vehicle that your son was using when you looked at that.
In the beginning, I really feel like the vehicles give a perception of safety, but ROVs are not safe, and the fact that so many children have lost their lives has proven that time and time again.
And when your son was bucked into the vehicle, did you trust that the seatbelt would keep him from being thrown from the vehicle just like it would in a car?
Of course. We think the products that we buy are safe.
Did the vehicle your son was riding look like the kind of vehicle that would lead to more than 300 deaths? Or I guess you already said the vehicle.
Absolutely not.
Proponents of the CPSC rule and activists like yourself had said that the type of everyday use of the ROVs that lead to rollover deaths is not necessarily obvious to riders, particularly children. Do you agree?
I agree.
And based on your work advocating on behalf of other victims of ROV accidents, do you believe that children are particularly vulnerable?
I do. I do. And I believe waiting for more data is waiting for more deaths.
So what I would like to see is, rather than saying we have to have perhaps years more of study and years more of death, that the industry work with the advocates and with the CPSC and with their investigators to, if you don't think the mandatory rule is proper, then figure out what a mandatory rule ought to look like. Didn't you say, Ms. Falvey, that there's imports, et cetera, and that, we need to look at all of those?
The way the statute would work, the commission would need to know that there's substantial compliance before they relied upon a voluntary standard. Or they could just decide we don't have confidence in these foreign manufacturers and that they'll be compliant and move forward with their final rule.
So why don't we have a mandatory standard that would apply to all, including imports? I mean, I just feel so strongly that when we have an opportunity to do something that's going to save a life, and I know that there's complicated mathematics that figures out money spent, is it worth a life? I don't really abide by that, and it seems to me that 335 is enough. I think your son is enough, that we ought to move ahead. I support moving ahead as quickly as possible with the mandatory standards, and I yield back.
Chair, thanks to Gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back. I'll recognize myself 5 minutes for questions. Ms. Falvey, let me just first off say thank you for your work on the Virginia Graham Baker pool standards. I was on the subcommittee when that bill went through and actually added the language for ornamental pools because, as you may recall, we lost a number of people at the Fort Worth Water Garden just shortly before that came through, which underscored to me the necessity of including ornamental pools as well as backyard pools. But when you were doing the drain cover recall, did you go from a voluntary standard to a mandatory standard during that process?
Yes, we did.
And what were the advantages or perhaps the disadvantages in moving from the voluntary to the mandatory standard?
The advantage is always safety and stopping death. You're always tempted to move as quickly as possible in order to address an addressable risk. The disadvantage in that circumstance...
Let me just interrupt you there for a second, if I could, because which is the more expeditious path, the voluntary or the mandatory?
It depends, but it can be more expeditious to rely on the voluntary standard. You get industry and the CPSC staff working together on a standard that everyone can agree on. The problem with doing it too quickly and mandated in its law when it's not quite ready to be law is that in that case, we didn't make things safer fast enough in that the drain covers were tested by different labs in different ways. We didn't know that the test results, exactly how to do the tests at the lab level, and there were different labs passing different drain covers, and we ended up with pools with brand new drain covers installed that weren't compliant. And we had to recall those, pull them out, and put them in properly tested. That works well in the voluntary world where things can be iterative and change over time. When you make it mandatory law, it changes the equation. And so while it's helpful from a safety perspective to move as quickly as possible, and that's always the CPSC's goal, if you don't do it right, it can cost an enormous amount of money, and it doesn't save lives. And that's what we want to try to avoid.
Very well. Now, Mr. Pritchard, I guess I should ask this question of you. The list that Ms. Cromichael read is impressive, but it's also impressive because of the young age of so many of the people who met their demise. Do you placard these machines with an age restriction or a recommendation for training under certain ages?
We do. The industry's recommendation is that in order to drive an ROV, you need to be at least 16 years of age and have a valid driver's license. These are not toys. These are not meant to be driven by children. This is on the machines. It's part of the free online training that's available to everyone. It's certainly part of the hands-on training that's available. Children don't belong behind the wheel of these vehicles. We've covered a lot of ground here in sort of very short form. One thing I do want to clarify is that when we talk about a voluntary standard and the requirements under the voluntary standard, that's enforceable. That's enforceable by the CPSC. It's not voluntary in the sense of an opt-in and an opt-out. It's the standard. And that is how the approximately 14 to 15,000 other products that are under the jurisdiction of the CPSC are handled. I mean, you can imagine the CPSC trying to write 15,000 different standards for every product out there. So the voluntary standard is enforceable.
Yeah, let me just interrupt you for a minute because I want to run out of time, and I want to be respectful of the other members. Now, Ms. Cromichael, on your, I think it's a Facebook page that's set up to the memory of your son, there's a list of, I guess, safety measures, for want of a better term. One mentions the age, another mentions a helmet. I mean, these are things that your organization recommends?
First off, I don't have an organization per se, but if we're talking about the fact that children shouldn't be on them, then I would have to say, what about Karen Harwood, 46, or Andrea Jones, who's 34?
And that's an excellent point. And I was going to ask Mr. Warfield, you've studied this for a long time.
Yes.
The age placarding may be one thing, but I want to say this as nicely as I can, but does body mass make a difference? That is, the lighter the driver, because most of the people older than age 16 that Ms. Cromichael mentioned on her list, most of those were women, so presumably of lighter body weight. Does that make a difference? Is that something that you have studied?
Not the weight itself, sir. What I see time and time again with these machines, it's operator error. It has almost nothing to do with the design of the vehicle. Please let me carry one step further here. I've been operating these machines since 1985. I currently have 13 ATVs. I have 4 ROVs. I have a brand new one coming in today. I am on those ROVs every day, either maintenance or through training. I have never rolled an ROV over. I have never rolled an ATV over. I have operated these machines in every state in the United States, including Alaska and Hawaii, except for North Dakota. I don't know why I missed out on North Dakota, but what I'm getting at is I put these machines through their paces, through training, through an advocate of riding. I wear a helmet. I make sure the proper age person is operating the machine. I follow the guidelines. So what I'm saying is I have trusted this industry. I have trusted this industry that they've shown me, they've given me and my family a vehicle that is safe to operate. I am really concerned that now CPSC is saying, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. And to answer your question, why wait? I've been operating a machine that was perfectly capable of doing everything I wanted. If we're going to make a change, let's make sure that change is not a negative change.
All right, I'm going to ask you to hold that thought, and the chair will recognize Ms. Clark. 5 minutes for questions, please.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the ranking member, and I thank our witnesses for their testimony here today. It's been more than a half a decade since the Consumer Product Safety Commission issued the advance notice of proposed rulemaking in 2009. Since then, CPSC has conducted thorough research to determine the appropriate mandatory standards for ROVs. CPSC staff reviewed more than 550 ROV-related incidents, 335 of which resulted in the death of the driver or passenger or both. Each incident was reviewed by a multidisciplinary team, including an economist, human factors engineer, a health scientist, and a statistician. The Commission also worked with SEA Limited, a CPSC contractor, to create a ROV rollover simulator from scratch. In addition to the agency's own data collection, this year the CPSC also held a 7-hour public meeting in which the Commission heard testimony from and asked questions of witnesses both for and against the proposal. By any traditional measure, internal research, hypothetical simulation, incident review, and public input, the Commission has conducted a thorough investigation and has more than enough information to issue appropriate standards. Ms. Crow-Michael, your son was not the only person affected by weak safety standards that allowed Yamaha to continue selling defective versions of the Rhino ROV. In 2009, the Consumer Product Safety Commission estimated that 59 people were killed riding the Rhino. In fact, the Rhino accident epidemic was one of the primary drivers of the Commission's original rulemaking. But H.R. 999 would force the CPSC to contract with the National Academy of Sciences to conduct further research before implementing these reasonable and thoroughly tested standards. So my question to you, Ms. Crow-Michael, is do you think more data is needed to determine the ROVs that are currently on the market are unsafe?
CPSC, I think they've worked hard to get the data that they have. They've spent money to gather and understand that data. More delay, it puts children and all people at serious risk of injury or death. I'm sorry. But I don't think more data is needed. I think it's been enough time. And like I said before, waiting for more data is waiting for more deaths.
And then let me just follow up with that question. You've suffered an unspeakable loss because of an unsafe ROV. Do you think that the CPSC is rushing to judgment in proposing standards for a recreational activity responsible for more than 330 deaths in the last decade?
No.
I thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky. 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here to testify today. I have a question for Mr. Pritchard. I noticed in your testimony you mentioned that the ROHVA is accredited by the American National Standards Institute to develop standards for the equipment, configuration, and performance of ROVs. Can you tell us more about this process and how voluntary safety standards have been developed over the last few years? And does this process involve the CPC? I know you touched on it a little bit, but how that process of voluntary standards that are mandated, and is the CPSC involved?
Absolutely. And cut me off when you get tired of listening, because I can talk about this all day. ROVA was formed in 2007. The work on a voluntary standard began in 2008, so essentially almost immediately. In 2010, a voluntary standard was developed and published, then another version in 2011, and another version in 2014, reflecting the evolving technology. The way the process works is you get the process started through a procedure mandated by, it's ANSI, that's the acronym, for this process. You put out a proposed draft standard to the canvas. And the canvas is made up of a variety of stakeholders. And the stakeholders include, in every iteration, has included the CPSC, it's included consumer groups, it's included industry, it's included user groups, it's a broad swath. And the way this works is people get the draft, the canvassees comment and submit their comments back in. The comments are shared with everyone on the canvas. Then ROVA responds to those comments. Each one has to say, your suggestion for this area, say seatbelts, here's our response. Then the canvas gets all of those comments from ROVA back to the canvassee, so everyone gets to see this full exchange of information, and then a consensus is built around the voluntary standard. It's then sent to ANSI. Here's how we did it, and ANSI checks that process and verifies that you followed the ANSI procedure. When ANSI approves it, then it becomes official. And ultimately, a book, for lack of a better word, is published, and that becomes a standard by which all of the vehicles subject to that voluntary standard must conform.
So then it becomes mandatory.
It's voluntary.
So what's the difference between mandatory and voluntary then?
Sure. It's voluntary in the sense of it's developed by stakeholders, but it's enforceable. Mandatory means the CPSC imposes what it thinks is the best approach. And where we are now is at an impasse between a voluntary standard that's brand new, that just came out in September 2014, and a mandatory standard, or at least a proposal for a mandatory standard based on the old standard, but a mandatory standard proposed by the CPSC. And the engineers and industry just think CPSC has got this wrong.
What was the voluntary standard better? What was it more likely to protect life than the mandatory standard?
So
what are the critical differences, and why is yours more better?
So there are what I'd call three fundamental differences between the two. One is on vehicle handling. The CPSC wants to impose something called an understeer mandate. Every vehicle must understeer, and I can tell you about that. The next is testing lateral stability. The CPSC's test for lateral stability, frankly, suffers from problems with repeatability and reproducibility, which the CPSC is conducting testing to address right now. The final piece is seatbelts. CPSC has proposed a seatbelt interlock, which would essentially prevent the vehicle from moving above 15 miles an hour if the seatbelts aren't used in both the driver and the passenger seat. Now, in the driver's seat, there's actually a lot of agreement. The voluntary standard includes that as an approach. The dispute really is over the passenger seat. CPSC commissioned a study of the passenger seat interlock. They just got the results, I think, in February. They published them in March. So they got these after the voluntary standard was voted out. And the study confirmed what industry had been telling that we've heard from our own consumers, which is no one wants this passenger side seatbelt interlock because drivers don't want to lose control of their vehicle. You add on top of that the technical challenges, which would be if you put your dog in the seat, your toolbox in the seat. This is an area for which there's no answer. And the final wrinkle on this is that even on the driver's side seatbelt interlock, it doesn't work with a diesel or carbureted engine because it has to be talking with a computer. The computer has to talk from the seatbelt to the speed limiter to tell it that we have a connection here. So that is one small example of what is a frankly complex area. And the CPSC's engineers, while I believe well-intentioned, don't have this right. And I want to add, we went through this voluntary standard process last year, which I didn't think the CPSC was very engaged in. A better way to put that, though, is that they seem to be much more engaged with industry now. And there's a meeting taking place right now between industry and CPSC staff to discuss the voluntary standards. That's the path forward.
Thank you. And before I yield back, if I could, I just want to say, Ms. Carmichael, thank you for coming. Your advocacy is very important, and thoughts and prayers are with you. But thank you for taking this cause, and hopefully we can come to the right standard and do the right and have the right thing as a result. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes Ms. Schakowsky for the purpose of unanimous consent request.
I'd like to put on the record statement of G.K. Butterfield's opening statement of the statement of John Sand, father of an ROV victim, letters from the American Academy of Pediatrics, letter from various consumer groups, testimony of Rachel Weintraub of the Consumer Federation of America before the CPSC, citizens report that Ms. Crow-Michael referred to in her testimony. We'll add that to the permanent record.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair would just note I offered Ms. Schakowsky a follow-up question. She declined. I did have one follow-up question that I wanted to ask. Ms. Crow-Michael, your son was injured on the Yamaha Rhino 450. And I just asked the question of anyone on the panel, is that particular model still available? Is that something that is still sold on the market?
I can address it.
Please.
That vehicle is not sold. In fact, you're talking about a vehicle from 2007, if I recall your testimony correctly. We're now 3 voluntary standards past that. So the technology has evolved beyond that. I can add there are tens of thousands of those Rhinos still in use that people enjoy. At this point, have probably put on hundreds of thousands, if not more, hours of use. But no, the technology for these vehicles has evolved, and we're now in a new standard.
But you could still buy one on Craigslist.
Yeah, I would guess.
Yeah. So it's going to be an informational challenge to get information to people who may be new purchasers of old machines.
But those vehicles, and respectfully, are not defective. Period. I think that I think these incidents are more complicated than what we've heard today. I don't think that's the focus of today. I think the focus of today is, can we get this right between industry and the CPSC? And if the CPSC just won't listen to industry, they won't listen to the folks who make these vehicles, maybe they'll listen to the National Academy of Sciences.
Very well. The chair wishes to thank all members of the panel. Ms. Crow-Michael, I just echo what Mr. Guthrie said. I'm sure every member of the subcommittee extends to you our condolences for your loss. Seeing that there are no further members wishing to ask questions, before we conclude, I would like to submit the following documents for inclusion on the record by unanimous consent. Statement for the record from Commissioner Marietta Robinson of the Consumer Product Safety Commission. A letter, we already did Mr. Olson's letter, a response letter from Chairman Elliott Kate to Chairman Olson. Pursuant to committee rules, I remind members they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record. I ask the witnesses to submit their response within 10 business days upon receipt of the questions. Without objection, again, my thanks to the panel, and thank you for staying with us through a long morning. Without objection, the subcommittee is adjourned.